most of us in Asia actually know about you because
Oh, thank you very much.
well, when during when we were discussing the organization of the Start Me Up Hong Kong Festival, as you know, Winston, because this year is virtual, it gave
Right.
us actually the flexibility to reach out to a lot of these global keynote speakers that normally would have
Got it.
never flown to Hong Kong for this, right? So,
That's right. Yeah.
I'm very grateful because of, this, again, making lemonade out of lemons to have you with us today. So, if you don't mind, Winston, again, just a bit of background, right? When
Mhm.
is your new book coming out?
It will be in September, I think, because right now the book cover is being designed, and we're finishing up the script editing, and
Right.
all the book recommendations from financial industry leadership are also coming back in. So we're putting the things together, and it's interesting to release the
Yeah.
book about sovereign funds tech investments in the middle of the pandemic.
That is, it's very timely.
Mm.
Again, I have to be aware of the fact that most of the audience, in
Mhm.
the Start Me Up Festival may not know you as well as I do. So, if you don't mind, just walking through a bit, again,
Mhm.
your long track record at CIC, and then starting the first, Silicon Valley technology investment initiative on behalf of CIC. I remember when I was in banking, I've heard of your name, So again, just a bit of background. Do you mind sharing your life journey a bit with the audience here at Start Me Up Festival?
Sure thing. Yeah. So I was obviously Chinese native. I was born in Suzhou, Jiangsu province, which is 1 hour away from Shanghai, where I went to Fudan University for my undergrad and the law school. And of course, by now it's like 30 minutes away by the high-speed train, right? My undergrad at Fudan was semiconductor physics, silicon devices, and for graduate studies, I went into Fudan University's law school. So I also became a Chinese lawyer. Upon graduation, I received the scholarship from NYU Law School. So 1998, I came to the States. After a year of Master of Law studies, I passed the U.S. bar, New York bar, more precisely, and I joined the Davis Polk New York office, becoming a U.S. securities lawyer. And of course, that time was sort of the last tech bubble, right? So 2001, I left the law firm, went back to B school. Of course, bubble burst. After MBA, I returned to New York Wall Street, and I joined JP Morgan at its equity-linked capital markets division, for equity-linked offerings and equity derivatives and other equity-linked products. 2007, briefly, I was hired by Barclays for its U.S. Expansion. And very interestingly, it was the same year, end of 2007, CIC was set up in China to manage a portion of China's gigantic foreign reserve. So I became one of the first group of overseas hires by CIC, and I moved back to China beginning of 2008. And at CIC, I had about 10 years exciting journey of global investments, including 4 years actually based in Toronto, Canada, for CIC's North America office, before CIC later set up the New York office for North America. During the 10 years of CIC, I worked in transactions in multiple sectors, reflecting the evolving themes of the global investment markets, right? 10 years ago, lots of focus on natural resources, energy, mining, and even agriculture. And of course, during the crisis, there was also opportunity in the financial service sector because the banks were under pressure And in more recent years, technology and digital economy becomes a new theme, right? But overall, as you mentioned, I set up a vehicle in CIC, at CIC, for cross-border tech investments, and that was at the year of 2009 and 2010. So that was a very early trial of cross-border tech investments, and that was a very fun experience because that was to some extent the best fast 10-year of growth of the mobile internet and more recently the digital economy.
Right. And hence your new book. And correct me if I'm wrong, Winston, this is your second book?
Actually, multiple books.
Multiple books. Sorry.
Yeah,
My bad.
My first book was 2006, actually, believe it or not, when I was at JP Morgan. And the title, was nothing more than nothing, no less than invest in China. So that was my 2006 book, and the background of that was the introduction of the QFII system, Qualified Foreign Institutional Investor System, right? Which for the first time provided access to foreign investors to invest in China's domestic market. And in that kind of context, actually, Hong Kong was a very important channel for North American and European investors to get into the QFII banks, quote unquote, and then indirectly get into the China market. So that was the first book, right? And in more recent years, since 2016, I started this book on digital economy series, like on China's digital revolution. The first book of that series was titled China's Mobile Economy in 2016. That was sort of the peak time of China's mobile economy, right? And in 2017, when I published the Chinese version, the title changed to the China Digital Economy 2.0. And the catalyst for that, obviously, was the 2017 historical Go chess game between AlphaGo of Google and China's best human player, right? Because of that game, people realized that the industry has to look beyond the mobile internet to look into more digital technologies. So that was the 2007 book. And 2018 book, also in that series, was titled Digital Silk Road in German, which was written in the context of China's digital economy expanding into overseas, right? And in 2019, I published the book in Japanese version. And by the way, every year there's a huge updates because every year the economy has changed, right? So 2019 was the Japanese version book, and thanks to the Japanese publisher's imagination, the book title was China's AI Big Bang. All right, so that was the book series, and so actually for that book series this year, I am working on the new script for English version again, back to Wiley Publishing again, just like 2016 first book, and the title will be the China's digital economy, and I think in 20 itself, instead a lot more focus on the new technologies like AI, blockchain, and the cloud infrastructure, right? And the other book you mentioned, which will be released in September, relates to my adjunct professor course at NYU, because I now also teach a course at NYU about sovereign funds, overseas investments, and increasing regulations, right? So in connection with that class, I'm publishing a book with the title "The Hunt for Tech Unicorns," relating to sovereign funds investments and how they change the landscape of venture capital investments, right? So to answer your question, there are like, the multiple first book, right? The very first book, 2006, Invest in China, about what was about the cross-border thing, and the China's digital economy series is also about this cross-border digital economy expansion, and the sovereign wealth fund book is meant to cover the group of frontier investors that are changing the cross-border tech investment world.
I mean, you must be, if not the, I mean, I can't imagine any other young global leader who has been as prolific with their pen than you have.
Yeah, with a pen is the best description.
Oh, pen is mightier than the sword, right? So, I mean, oh wow! I mean, this is people say, what does it take to be a YGL? Well, there you go. Look at Winston's track record. Again, if I remember correctly, Chelsea Clinton was in your class, right?
Correct. And actually, she's also involved with the NYU.
Yeah.
Right. She promotes multi kind of like a religious community dialogue. Yeah, at NYU.
Yeah, sorry. You're my celebrity hero in the academic world. I mean,
yes. Well, once you were trained as a lawyer, and even though you're not working as a lawyer, you still get to that training of using the pen.
Absolutely. I mean, and for the purpose of Start Me Up, again, I mean, I'm sure, I mean, we can go hours and hours, and honestly, we would love to have you back with our next main event when the new book comes out, because I think the world needs to see what you have done. For the purpose of this summer, and what advice, you have 20 years track record in, not just, I think, venture capital, but more importantly, applying digital innovation, applying entrepreneurship, applying technological advances real time to investments, again, to create a more sustainable future, right? I mean, so on that note, I mean, what advice would you give to young Asian startups starting in 2020 to make their companies more, attractive or more impactful for the world in your point of view?
Right. I will start by the common notion of thinking big, but I think after the last couple of years of tide up, tide down, we have a much better understanding of this concept of thinking big. On one hand, actually, there's several aspects to this. First of all, the thinking big thing is always important for venture, I think, and it's not a fact because of the 100 billion vision fund. Without that example, people still need to really think big in order to make a venture sustainable and attractive. And this is something I learned from my working experience, because naturally people would think about the company's potential profitability. But once you become more experienced in the field, you will find, at the very beginning that was not that quantifiable. Actually, I'm not saying it's not relevant, but it's not that quantifiable, right? But what's really sort of making a startup different is that it's the potential market, and also the potential edge in that market that can keep your market share as big as you started, right? So the concept here is so the second aspect to this is how it's not about start picturing the big market and big market share, but rather is to find a way to position yourself and have the actual technology edge to sustain that market share in the market that you predicted, right? So if you may be right about one big market, but if your only strategy is to burn cash and attract early users, that may not be sustainable, right? But on the other hand, if you have unique technology, then you may create a market and also keep your big market share there, right? So that's the second aspect of this think big thing. And then the third aspect is really think big in terms of like changing the world for good, right? For global sustainable growth. And for that, I not only speak from a social good perspective, but seriously from an investment perspective, because for lots of the institutional investors, especially for the sovereign wealth funds or main government pensions, these large fiduciary investors, let's say, they have a fiduciary obligation to seek returns, but at the same time, they are also very active ESG promoters, right? So to the extent a creation can both be profitable and sustainable for the world, that's a very attractive, quote unquote, investable project for large investors, right? So to me, that's probably the best way to get to that, let's say 100 million check moment.
Yes.
Yeah, because these large investors, they're looking for investments that can be scalable. So that's big in terms of the company can be big, but also, this has huge ESG implications. So it has a big impact for investment, right? Yeah. And thirdly, if there's more of this group into the mix, it may create a ecosystem, and which will actually make the market even bigger. So then it becomes a very virtuous cycle.
Yeah, you absolutely hit the nail, because everyone has been chasing the same pool of investors.
Mm-hmm.
And defining the project to chase after that. What you are saying is majority of the startups are ignoring, again, the large sovereign wealth funds, right? The large state-owned asset funds, right? Again, I think the pension funds and all that, that's where you're right. The scalability comes from. And my very last question, again, this is really not a question, Winston, but do you know how many people would love for you to come back and run the fund again?
Well, lots of news messages about people change there. I have no comment on that. Yes. Yeah.
Would you ever consider, right, taking the pen and then maybe move it back to a keyboard?
Yes. Yeah. No, actually, right now I'm enjoying some time in the private market again. Kind of my Wall Street route to some extent. But I'm still very close to the sovereign fund network, and I'm all research. So if I may, I just finish that's a think big concept, right? In the context of these large investors, last couple of years, actually this is the main theme of my upcoming book, right? These sovereign funds and government pensions, let's call them sovereign investment funds. They are the unicorn makers, right? they're the unicorn makers to the extent that they always come in maybe at the later round D, round E, or even pre-IPO round to write a big check. In the last couple of years, we saw too many cases, where these unicorns or unicorns to be show up at a moment that they're burning a lot of cash for expansion, right? And lots of these companies did not do very well. Because this cash burn for market share model has proved to be lack of stickiness, let's say, right? But still, right? That capital pool is still there. So I think the upcoming trend will be companies, startup companies, truly come up with unique technologies, and then these large check will come in, also making these companies become unicorns, but not in the sense of cash burn, market share, and valuation on paper. Instead, it will be technology, more capital, innovation, a breakthrough, and new demand, new market, right? I think that should be the direction we should look into.
Man, again, I really do hope that everybody listens to you from the entire Start Me Up Festival, because you're actually giving very solid and concrete advice to startups, not staying in theory, and which is why we really do appreciate you taking this, 30 minutes of your time out of your very, very busy schedule to educate us. On that note, again, one last point, please do help some Asian startups go down this route that you mentioned in your book. We are counting on you to revolutionize the startup community in Hong Kong through your involvement with Start Me Up Festival. Thank you again, Winston. Again, I'm sure our paths will cross very soon. We very look forward to having you at our next big event before end of the year. And again, congratulations on your new book. We cannot wait to read it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Hong Kong has been this hub for finance and innovation for so many years, and we should look forward to making it greater going forward.
Thank you. Good morning, Hajo.
Good morning, Kenneth. Good afternoon to you.
Right. So again, on behalf of Start Me Up Hong Kong, it's a pleasure having you join us today, discussing all the great things that SingularityU does in terms of advancing impact and sustainability. We actually have, I believe, one or two other Singularity alumni within our larger network of experts within this festival. But your story clearly hailing from, I believe, Amsterdam, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, would be something that, quite interesting for our audience here in Hong Kong. So why don't we start off, why don't you explain, give a bit of background of who you are, what drives your passion for sustainability through education?
Yeah, no, thanks, Kenneth, and great to have this conversation. I mean, my background is very entrepreneurial, so I'm always used to help start up small organizations and sometimes larger one if it happens, on sort of the overlap between technology and human behavior. That's sort of my deep passion and purpose is really towards how that can be combined. And I think in the future we'll also see that technology really expects a lot from humans, and in the past, of course, humans expected a lot from technology, and sort of that overlap and how that works. That's really what fascinates me. And I mean, throughout the years, I'm 45 now, and I worked a lot with SMEs here in the Netherlands on smaller and medium-sized enterprises back in the days when websites really were necessary to transmit information, and then worked for 10 years in emerging markets on using mobile technology to really give people access to all kinds of information. And I think one other red thread throughout my careers has always been that educational part is really how to use information content in such a way that it really helps people. And I think the educational system is not always perfectly aligned with this new day and age. There's so much possible, but it's also a great opportunity at this point, I think, to really challenge the way we educate ourselves, but also the way we educate our kids and our fellow colleagues on new ways of thinking. And I think at SingularityU we really try to push the envelope on really trying to open people's mindset towards this new world where we're living in, on exponential technologies and new ways of leadership, and really see how we can design content in such a way that it really leads to action. And I think that my main issue there as well is that at the moment we're really doing that a lot for companies, for executives, but we've also done a lot of programs for youth, for the next generation, for kids, and I think there's really a lot more to learn from that side and to develop in the next couple of years and months. Also because we see that these sort of global big changes that are coming our way, also such as COVID-19 now in 2020, are really a great way as well to learn that we need new thinkers in the future. And it's not just about controlling the current situation or looking at numbers on how it's currently evolving or how other technologies are coming our way, such as AI or you name it. But really, how do we craft the next generation of more exponential thinkers instead of the linear human beings that we are and that our parents were, and where we've also seen that really, if you live in this world, you should think ahead more and in a different way. And the way we are hardwired as humans in this linear mindset, it's not the best way to really cope with fast changing circumstances. So training new exponential leaders, not only on an executive level with people that might go for their pensions in a couple of years, but really on the next generation. That's really what I think is there's a lot of work needed there and a lot of opportunities.
Right, of course. I mean, it's right now in June. I think a lot of us are kind of over the whole let's pivot because of COVID. It's more like, what if something else in the next 5 years happens like COVID? How can we do better as one world? Right? I mean, I have no offense. I know I'm definitely not getting into politics here, right? But
no. Same here.
Yeah, your government has done a great job in many ways. Flattening the curve, and again, everybody. It's kind of like the mindset is, we've gone through this. Now we're much more prepared, right? In your mind, with your involvement in Singularity and a lot of these great startups, do you have one example right now of that you can think of a great story to tell that hopefully can educate, others to know how to pivot next time something like this happens?
Yeah, I think that there are many funny stories, but I think that that one is really it's a very basic one. I mean, we all know this Rubik's cube, and people are twisting it. Kids are trying to learn how that works and are trying to think along the lines. And if you can really solve a Rubik's cube very fast, or if you can even solve it, you're very smart, and you sort of go up in the hierarchy of other kids because you're the person who could solve a Rubik's cube, and it's all cool and this and that, and nobody knows why it's really important to solve a Rubik's cube, but it is to sort of prove that you're smart and you can see through things, and it's three-dimensional and this and that, and it's fun, of course, as well. And then there was sort of the moment as well when also kids really saw that you could also program a very basic robot, so a couple of basic hands with some AI and a couple of small sensors, to solve it faster. So
For
there
you.
were all kinds of competitions on humans trying to solve a Rubik's Cube even faster. Nobody knew why, but because of the fact that if you would be the fastest, then they would be the coolest. And then technology was already there and could solve that faster. But what does that mean for us humans? Is it then just cool if you can program a robot that can solve the Rubik's Cube even faster? Or is then the fun over? Is a Rubik's Cube not fun anymore because a computer will always sort of be the better part of us? And I think that kids, youth, is sort of better at understanding and giving us that see-through on what is really important for us at the moment anymore. I mean, Rubik's Cube are still being sold, but we also know that will never be as fast as a computer. It will never happen that mankind again will be as fast as solving a Rubik's Cube than a computer is. But what does it mean? And I think the discussions as well that we have with SingularityU here with those kind of topics, what technology means for us being human. I mean, technology is also is really a lens through which we see the world, and also these new changing circumstances. I think as well with big pandemics, it's also a lens through which we see the world. It changed our perspective on things. It changed the way we worked. And like you said, I mean, we're trying to sort of go back to a new normal and learn from it and say, well, at this moment we're very much more geared towards a possible a future disruptive technology. But are we? And is it really just good to sort of be prepared, or is it better to sort of train people that know how to faster cope with these circumstances instead of having a plan on preparedness? I think plans on preparedness are great, and with pandemics you should have hospitals that are now geared towards serving people better in the near future. Of course we should, but we should also be aware that we cannot predict what the next big disturbance in our universe will be. Maybe it's more of a technological one instead of a biological one, and that really brings us to sort of thinking differently and a new mindset. And I think that sort of kids and youth are better at that as well, on really explaining how they feel in those circumstances. I think adults, and I consider myself being an adult as well most of the time, are good at a sort of analyzing it and putting it into brackets and then saying, well, if this happens next time, we'll be better prepared and we know how to handle this now. And the kid would also say, well, we don't know, or we have no clue what is coming, but let's try to be as flexible as possible. And we lose that flexibility over years. And I think it's a muscle we can train amongst adults, amongst executives, amongst senior leaders at organizations. But it's also important that we make sure that the next generation will not lose the strength in that muscle of adaptivity, of really being able to cope with fast changing circumstances. And I think that's really important, because I think we have not learned really that much at this moment. Like you said, our government in the Netherlands responded well, but it's also because the Netherlands is very small. This is an easy part of the world to contain. Things are very well organized, over-organized, and that really helps. And we were lucky in this phase, but we might be very unlucky with the next one. So it's keeping that mindset of a childhood, but also really being able to train kids to not lose that strength in that muscle is I think very important.
Right, and there has been so much talk, I think, either at WHub or United Nations. We had round table panels with, like Gates Foundation or Obama Foundation. And I think the consensus, you're right, Hajo, is the current education system from high school to university and then to MBA, none of it really covers some of the key aspects, like you mentioned, that is taught at Singularity, which is on innovation, intellectual curiosity and all that stuff. So if I was going to give you a magic pen where you can actually, help design the next, I don't know, education blueprint for young, sustainable, and impact leaders, right? What do you think some of the courses or topics would definitely be included in this curriculum?
I think first of all it's that you really embody the learning in experiences is very important. I think that that sort of the textbook learning. I'm a father of 3 kids. They're all in primary school. It's a lot of textbook learning. So they learn math, they learn reading and writing, which is all basic skills, and that's great. But at a certain point, combining that with real experiences, real life parts. And of course, we have all the experiences we have in our day-to-day life. If we bike to our work or take the car on the highway, these are all other experiences. But you can really design these experiences better to start learning faster and to start learning really things that matter as well. Like you say, on sustainability, on the global challenges of the world, you can design experiences as well for executives or for people in university or going towards the MBA or at their work, that really embody that learning instead of giving them textbook examples or case studies on certain parts or on how a certain company change their approach towards sustainability. I think it's also really important for humans to really experience how that worked and how that is. So I think those combinations are really important. I think that I've done a lot of executive courses as well throughout my years, and I think one thing is that you learn a lot, but if you end the course on a Friday and you go back to your normal day life on a Monday, it's really hard to maintain that learning, to keep it. And I think with more experiential and experience-based learning, it sticks better to you. You will keep those stories with you for a longer period than just a case study. And I really hope that that's something we can really change as well in our education system. And discussions have been going around that also for primary education here in Europe for a long time. But it's difficult to implement it in such difficult systems such as education, which are really still hardwired towards the linear thinking human being. And it's a challenge, but a very important one.
Right. I mean, ultimately, this, again, we are very honored because in some sense, Start Me Up Hong Kong Festival generally is an Asia-oriented event, right?
Yeah.
Because of COVID, guess what? We said, we're going to make the best lemonade out of lemons, and we're going to reach out to global experts to join us. And again, in some sense, I think this actually helps move things along in Asia. I mean, I'm not trying to compare apples and oranges, but we have a lot of developing economies here in our region. And
of course,
what you're describing right now, if implemented early, will make a humongous positive difference on the next generation of youth, so that they don't have to repeat what the more developed countries in Asia has gone through in terms of education. And then now we're learning your way of thinking. So hey, why don't we just look at Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, Philippines? Hey, why don't you jump directly to this more intellectual, curious approach of education? That's something what we want to achieve. So having you here today, I think is really a great positive step towards that direction, and I cannot thank you enough for that, Hajo. Any last thoughts, things that you after this beautiful 20-minute fireside chat, and it's never enough. You and I can talk for hours.
Sure.
If there's one takeaway you want our audience in terms of, youth in Asia to learn from this, your experiences, what would that point be for you?
No, I think learning from my experiences is I'm not that type of person who thinks highly of himself in that respect. But I think more of the openings I see, and also combined with your views and your work on the startup part, I think as well. Getting back to that sort of more experience-based learning, I think that sort of startup mindset that startups have, that's very important, because there's so much going on if you start up a company and you're so uncertain about almost everything. I think it's got a very experimental and open mindset in a certain part, and I think bringing that back as well to schools and to youth is very good. I think that if we would have sort of a startup mindset at schools, giving them projects on how to work on, really geared towards maybe in the future setting up a company, but otherwise if they join a government or an existing company, but still have sort of that startup mind and that way that sort of works, because they learned how to really experiment and experience that at school, it can be very important. But that's just something that popped up in my head. But I think that combination between the future of education and the way that you also work with startups, that can be very valuable.
No, man. Again, experience is my favorite word, because I'm sorry, I love learning on the job, right?
Sure.
That's how you, frankly, the most beautiful stories in my life are experience based. It's not, that's, if you can apply to the education, why not? So, but I'm sure, Hajo, we would definitely love to see more of you and what you do in our side of the world. And again, see this as the beginning of a long-term, beautiful relationship about us discussing the importance of educational advances and innovation. As I said, we are building this world to hand it over to the next generation. So if we can guide them how to think better, that also helps us as well. So it's a circular economy on that for sure. Yeah. Your information, of course, is publicly accessible now that you are featured on our speakers list. So I'm sure if if there are any questions from the audience, I'm sure they'll reach out to you. But again, thank you so much, Hajo, for this.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Yeah, we look forward to learning more from you in the near future.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And you know what? I am so excited for this next Fireside Chat specialist, because you know why? We need people who actually not just talk the talk, but also walk the walk, especially when it comes to urban health challenges in rapidly growing cities, such as a lot of the cities we are and we have in Asia. Without further ado, I would love to introduce Ms. Tolullah Oni. Tolullah, again, thank you so much for being here with us today. If you don't mind, can you quickly self-introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your passion for what you do? Thank you so much.
Thanks for the kind introduction. I'm really excited to chat to you. And hello, everyone. I am Tolullah, as you mentioned. I am a public health doctor and an urban epidemiologist. And I used to have to explain what an epidemiologist was, but in these times of COVID, everybody knows what an epidemiology does. But perhaps an urban epidemiologist may be less familiar, in part because I coined that as a way of highlighting it. So when we talk about epidemiology, we're normally thinking about disease, we're thinking about patterns of disease and understanding, and thinking about it differently. I'm thinking about it as an urban epidemiologist, we're thinking much more about the role of the urban and recognizing that the urban is an important driver and of ill health and could be a potentially important contributor to health creation, depending on how we do it. So that is what I do. I'm based at the University of Cambridge, the MRC Epidemiology Unit there, and we are focused on on this topic. A lot of what we do is, I say I don't work on disease, so don't ask me which disease I study. I work on health, because the key thing is we see this now with COVID. You know, we talk about COVID, but it's much easier for people to understand now. Well, it's not just about COVID, right? We talk about the comorbidities that impact COVID. So it's not just, are you infectious disease or non-communicable? Well, it's all they all interact in different ways, right? And they all interact with the environment. So when we talk, even with the environment, when we talk about the impact of air pollution, it's not just about your lungs. It's not just about respiratory. We know it increases your risk of lung infections, respiratory disease, but we also know it increases your risk of heart disease and strokes, you know, and we know it impacts on whether or not you're able to have an active, engage in active travel or be physically active for leisure, and that impacts on obesity. And so it's not just about infectious disease, it's not just about, so we have to start thinking more cross-cutting and not focusing on a particular disease, but rather going upstream and thinking about the drivers, the root causes, also not just as a reaction, because that's the other thing, right? So, sorry, I'm going to go all over the place, because
Please do.
so bring me back to where you want to be, whatever. You know, when we talk about the root causes, and we start thinking about the drivers of ill health, there is sometimes a predisposition to wait until health is missing in order to say we need to do something. But, you know, people aren't born patients, right? People are born people. You become a patient when you have a health deficit, right? You have a lack of health. So how can we create a sense of urgency in how we think about cities and how we think about urban growth as a catalyst for health creation, as an emergency, with as much of an emergency response as we activate when we see there's a pandemic and when there's already a lack of disease. So this is really what drives me, because there is a slow motion pandemic happening, and this is a key feature across all, particularly rapidly growing cities. And I focus on rapidly growing cities because that's where the pace of change is happening. The environment is not slow motion, but the impact on the population health is slow motion. It's slow motion, it's disconnected in time, it's disconnected in space. And so we sit and stew in it as if we have the luxury of time. So I'm driven by this. We really don't. And the more, and particularly, you know, if you had a city that was slow growing, you think, okay, well, nothing's changing for a while. Things great now, but you know, the next ratchet up of something that will impact our health, it's going to take a while, so we have time. If you're in a city that is growing so rapidly, where you look out the window and, you know, month on month you see change happening. If you live in a city where not only is it happening linearly, but it's you know, it's dynamic. So both the nature of the change, who governs how the change happens, who is responsible for access to those spaces, that is all happening so rapidly, and there are so many different types of actors. It's not as simple as, oh, let's speak to the government, who then does that. You know, well, a lot of these spaces are not being necessarily built by the government. So who should we be speaking to, and how do we instill that sense of urgency and accountability to say, what I do, I'm a developer, I'm an infrastructure, but what I do is health, and I want to protect and create it. That is what
health, no, absolutely. Health underpins any type of development, because as you said, we are human beings ultimately. You know, Tolullah, you know, when our organization committee did research on you, you know, you're recognized, by WHub as Young Global Leader for your great work in advancing. Maybe it's just that urgency, that awareness, and not just that, you're actually coming with solutions, right? I mean, that's what makes everything you do so tangible. Talking about sustainability, and impact, what are your points of views on Asia as it, grows leaps and bounds? I mean, if you were to give advice to a government in Asia, for example, right? What are the more areas of improvement where you think they can really start and should start getting focused on?
So I would say two things come to mind. The first, and this is speaking particularly in the context of Asia as a rapidly growing region compared to, say, Africa as also a rapidly growing region. One of the key things, one of the things that frustrates me sometimes is the conflation of innovation as technology and a product. So I would say the one thing is to focus on innovation as a process, right? And what do I mean by that? There are so many different steps we need to take in, because what I'm proposing is logical and simple, but radical. And the only reason it's radical is because it's not because it's ideologically radical, because like, oh, we need to protect population health. Well, breaking news, not, But the reason it's radical is because there is so much about how we have set up society and our systems that will need to change in order to actually implement this. So the kind of very separate way in how we've set things up. So whether it's government is here and private is here, or the budget is in health, it's for over here, but in cities over here, or this is the person that does health, this is the person that, everything is being separated, and we don't like change as human beings, right? But we underestimate our capacity for change. And you see that again, in the context of this COVID pandemic, right? The amount of change that has happened without even thinking about it, right? Because we need to do it. What's the choice, right? We need to pull in manufacturing and that industry to help with the healthcare equipment. Well, okay, it's done. You don't have people saying, well, technically I'm not in the healthcare industry, so that would be it. No one's talking about that, right? You don't have to convince anyone. I've spent a long time trying to convince different types of people that they're health professionals. Now you don't have to, right? But so we have a capacity to change. As individuals, we have a capacity, individuals linked into organizations, we have a capacity to rethink the kinds of organizations that we set up, that we run, that we lead, but there's not so much impetus to do that. And so that process of innovating to change that cannot be underestimated. And so we need the bright minds that think about new gadgets and new tools. If you could apply that, I mean, technology is incredible and we need it, and it helps serve a particular purpose. But we have to ask what that purpose is, right? And we have to ask within which system, which ecosystem it's sitting in, to understand how it can actually deliver what the purpose is envisaged. So that's the first thing I would say: innovation as a ecosystem and process. And you'd be surprised what comes out of the woodworks when we say that, when we drive that. And the second is people. We have forgotten somewhere along the line that there are no cities without people. right? You can build a city, but if there are no people there, is it a city? Right? What calls a city is the activity, it's the opportunity, it's the access, it's the social, it's the economic, it's all of that, right? And that needs people. And you can't have people, you can't have the full potential of people by excluding a significant portion of people, which is fundamentally what cities do, either because you don't consider the access, or because, or you're detrimentally impacting health for certain groups of people. It's not charity, it's not social responsibility, it's the only way, right? It's like tying one leg up and trying to hop around. And he's like, why are you hopping around? It's like, well, no, I need some crutches because that's going to really help. It's like, or you could just put the other leg down so you can walk properly, right? So we spend a lot of time building the crutches and then, okay, maybe this device will help you walk. It's like, no, you actually have two legs. You could use that. So in the context of people, we often think about, often health equity is talked about in the context of, actually helping people who are poor. But if you think about the purpose of the city as being people and drivers and the engines of sustainable development, and then think about, okay, we're doing that, but we're going to cut off all of these people. They're not going to be able to access that opportunity, right? And then these other people can access it, but half the time they're kind of too sick to. But we've got 3 amazing people doing fantastic things. And then we focus on that as like, well, that's great. Let's showcase people doing amazing things. But there is a counterfactual that we miss here. Like, what would be possible if you unleash the full potential of the society that you have? And so those are the 2 things that I would say.
Wow, that was amazing. I mean, and to give you a bit of background, I'm also a real estate developer in many ways, but just hearing you say these things in such crystal and easy to understand ways, I think that's what, rapidly growing cities need. It's a heartbeat, right? The heart must pump blood to every corner of the city, right? You could just, right? Again, I'm not trying to draw medical terms, but that's what I felt when you just described that. So I hope I interpreted it right. I mean, lastly, if you don't mind, given your life journey, I believe, if I remember correctly, that you were born in Africa, and then you were, studied between
in Nigeria,
Syria,
get the country.
Nigeria, right? You were born in Nigeria, and then you have been, and now you're studying in London. And, have there been any stories of, resilience and, triumphs against adversity that you can share with our young, startup founders or entrepreneurs or researchers or scientists? Because, life is not always so rosy every day. So if you can give them hope and optimism, that would be, something that we can all really take away from.
I've thought about this a lot, and I've been asked this a lot. I mean, fundamentally, I have been very privileged in my upbringing, and in large part because of the and this is something I take for granted. It's just the never had that mindset of impossibility, right? So it was always, and so now I understand, and when I work with young people, I realize that the key thing you have to break out of is what is possible, what you're able to achieve. The other thing I would say is to recognize that different people have different trajectories in terms of achievement. And our education system is both, not just school, I mean like university, it's very quick to, it's very quick to dismiss the middling people, right? Because I was at medical school and I did not win any prizes. I had a great time. I was president of the Medical Students Union. I was on team sport. I did well, but I did not win any prizes, right? If my trajectory in life was determined by that point, you would have creamed off like just the prize winners, and everyone else just kind of gets an average existence. And it's taken a while for me, and part of it is finding your drive and finding what animates you. So I would say not to, obviously, ambition, but, and I'm not just speaking to the overachievers already, because you know what, people mature and fine wine like it's okay to not be the best at school, at primary school or at high school or at university. That tells you nothing about your potential. So I think that is we don't say that strong enough, because I see that post study. I always say, I hope I don't get trouble for this, but I find it so much easier to get into Cambridge to work than to study. It's a lot, because it's about thinking, right? Because if you have the space to, if you don't dismiss your potential and you have the space to develop your ideas, or you create the space to develop your ideas and to find that thing that animates you. And I don't say that lightly. I'm a process person. This is the process of getting there is really can be quite challenging. So for example, when I was doing my PhD, I was in South Africa. So I was in the University of Cape Town. And I ended up in South Africa because I wanted to do, I was working in infectious diseases in London before, like as a medical doctor, and I was starting research in HIV. So I ended up in a research group that was very immunology based. It was very lab based. I quickly realized that really wasn't what I was interested in. So I ended up doing my doctorate in epidemiology, and then kind of started leaning towards public health, but I was in an immunology group. And the sense of just the fraud, you felt like a fraud the whole time, because you had a meeting and everyone's having all these ideas, and I'm just saying, I don't have a single unique idea to add to this. That's a good idea. I can't think of a single unique idea, and you feel like a fraud for a long time. And it doesn't always entirely go away. We find things that we battle our demons every day. But the importance of just recognizing that that's okay. And I've started leaning into that and just, in a sense, getting more comfortable with not belonging. And when I'm in a space where I don't feel like my ideas entirely belong, whereas 10 years ago I would have questioned the validity of that thought, because if no one's thinking it, then why? Now I feel like, okay, it means I'm on the edge of something, right? So that's okay. So being comfortable with being uncomfortable is the one thing I think is, you underestimate the importance of that to really break through.
Spot on. I mean, you are definitely the most liveliest and the most charismatic fireside chat I've had for the whole festival. And you know what I love the most is you speak from your heart. You speak from your soul. I can feel it. I mean, it's, thank you so much today for, agreeing to help us hopefully inspire the Asian young leaders, that are going through difficult times, not only because of COVID, but also for economic, social, and political angles as well. You brought a lot of power, energy, and hope to this brief 20-minute fireside chat, and I honestly cannot thank you enough. I hope that, we can continue to work with you in the future. We'll build some bridges. And next year, we would love to have you join and come back and say, hey, Kenneth, remember all those things I told the audience? I want to see progress, and I will bet you that there will be progress because of today.
That's fantastic. You're doing a really great job. I think it's so vital exposing people to so different perspectives outside what you have access to on your day-to-day basis. Because again, that's where the ideas come from. Innovation often is just so limited to a single stream, and the diversity of ideas requires connecting across the globe. So I'm really grateful for the invitation. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you so much.